Sandstones and sacred stories. You arrive in a land where religion, trade, and myth swirl in the desert heat. Hey guys, tonight we're headed into one of the most argued over regions in human history, where the sand remembers more than any book, and where every stone has likely been cried on, prayed over, and fought across at least 5 times. You're standing on a ridge just outside Jerusalem. The sun is going down in smoldering gold, and the air smells like sagebrush dust and centuries of unfinished business. In one direction lies the holy city, layered with temples, mosques, and churches that seem to stack atop each other like emotional Lego. To the east, vast deserts stretching into Arabia. To the northeast, the highlands and plateaus of ancient Persia. It's quiet now, but if you put your ear to the ground, well, okay, don't actually do that, but metaphorically, you'd hear the murmur of millennia of ambition. You probably won't survive this if you're hoping for clean timelines or heroes who never change sides. In this region, everyone is someone else's villain, and the only consistent character might be the camel. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake enough, post your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where history is whispering people to sleep all around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your sandals crunch softly on the packed earth as you walk slowly down a stony slope toward what was once a Neolithic campfire site. Thousands of years ago, this spot held travelers, hunters, maybe a priest or two, arguing gently about stars or rainfall. And honestly, not much has changed. This region, Arabia, Persia, the Holy Land, is less a map and more a tension web. You've got tribes migrating, empires stretching, prophets preaching, merchants trading, and somewhere in the middle, always a disputed well or hill or story. Here's the thing about sacred land: it's never just about belief. It's about meaning, and everyone brings their own definition. A hill isn't just a hill if someone once saw a vision on it. A river's not just a river if it split 2 armies that claimed divine destiny. And a rock might be where heaven touches earth, or where someone dropped their sword and said, "Mine." Mainstream historical fact. Let's start simple. By around 3000 BCE, we have early city-states flourishing in Mesopotamia, Uruk, Sumer, and nearby trade links forming with the Arabian Peninsula. This wasn't empty desert. It was full of people, languages, rituals, and roots. They carried copper, frankincense, obsidian. They also carried grudges, because even back then, someone always thought their god was older, their lineage purer, or their goats better behaved. You pass a carved stone halfway buried in the soil. It's covered in worn cuneiform, Akkadian maybe. Could be a land grant, or a warning, or a recipe. No one really knows, but it's evidence that from the beginning, this land was claimed. As you reach the flat plain, the sky turns a deeper shade of ink, and a soft wind stirs sand against your robe. You imagine the empires that have risen and fallen across this spot. Hittites, Assyrians, Babylonians, all of them built things. All of them knocked things down. The fringe detail here. There's evidence that camel domestication may have been way later than once thought, possibly not until the late 2nd millennium BCE, which means for a long time all those trade caravans had to rely on donkeys. Historians still argue whether early long-distance Arabian trade was donkey-powered or if camels were quietly present in small numbers before the official date. You smile, because in a land of such grandeur, sometimes the biggest debates are about who had the better pack animal. You settle down on a warm rock, the stars beginning to pierce through the deepening purple above. Somewhere out there, the Euphrates still snakes through once glorious cities. To your south, the Red Sea laps the edges of a coast that once sent ships full of incense northward, incense bought with gold promises and possibly passive-aggressive poetry. Here, geography is destiny. There's nowhere to go without crossing someone's past. Every road is sacred. Every oasis was a meeting place for strangers with strong opinions. And as the night deepens, you realize something you've just scratched the surface. Behind you lies Jerusalem. Ahead, Persia. And wrapping around everything, the vast, patient dunes of Arabia. And all of it is about to get a lot more complicated. Camels' kings and caravan routes. Ancient trade paths carry not only spices, but rivalries that still echo today. The wind hums softly through a narrow canyon as you move eastward, following the footprints of caravans long since scattered to the wind. The moon is climbing now, spilling pale silver over the worn grooves of ancient trade paths. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the distant jingle of brass bells tied to the necks of animals that walked these trails before you. Welcome to the world of camels, kings, and caravan routes, a world where commerce doesn't just move goods, it moves cultures, languages, and sometimes armies. You trudge along a stony trail, eyes adjusting to the low light. To your left, steep ridges. To your right, a wide basin, where smoke from 100 cooking fires once rose each evening, signaling the arrival of travelers. What were they carrying? Cinnamon from India, lapis lazuli from Afghanistan, incense from southern Arabia, and ideas, so many ideas. Here's your historical anchor by the 1st millennium BCE. The incense route and early segments of the Silk Road were buzzing with activity. Arabia and Persia weren't just deserts and plateaus. They were the hubs of overland trade, laced with way stations, wells, and tax collectors, waiting with polite but unignorable ledgers. Quirky tidbit: some Nabatean merchants used coded marks on camel hooves to identify ownership, sort of like desert QR codes. And that's not even the weird part. There is growing evidence that some caravans used singing to keep camels calm, not majestic chanting, more like low rhythmic hums that worked like lullabies for grumpy desert tanks. You reach a caravanserai, an inn for weary travelers. It's abandoned now, but the stone arches still cast moonlit shadows, like they're waiting for a midnight reunion. Imagine it full. The scent of stewed lentils, laughter in 5 dialects, children snoring under wool blankets, and a trader grumbling about the price of myrrh in Damascus. Inside, painted murals once decorated the walls. Nothing grand, just depictions of the animals, stars and saints who watched over these dusty miles. Historians still argue whether these paintings were merely decorative or served a ritual purpose, perhaps a prayer for safe passage disguised as art. You sit on a cracked bench where some long-gone merchant once haggled for cinnamon. The Holy Land, Persia, and Arabia weren't just overlapping geographies, they were interwoven economies. And wherever trade passed, so did news, scripture, rumors, and sometimes plague. But let's not think about plague right now. You're trying to sleep. You sip imaginary tea, possibly ginger, definitely tepid, and picture what it was like when the road was alive. A Persian trader setting out from Ctesiphon, satchel full of silk. An Arab guide who knows the stars better than most people know their own cousins. A Roman official sweating through his uniform, wondering why his sandals are filled with sand. The caravan trails weren't just physical roads. They were routes of identity. What spices you carried, how your camels were dressed, which gods you prayed to before crossing a mountain pass. These were not details. They were declarations. And when 2 routes crossed 2 worldviews, often did too. Not every clash in this region came from war. Sometimes it started with overpricing dates or insulting someone's ancestry over dinner. And let's be real, there's nothing like 3 days in the desert to make people just a little snippy. But beneath the snips and snarls was something else: dependence. Persia needed the incense from Arabia. Arabia needed the iron tools and textiles that came from the north. The Holy Land, well, everyone wanted a foothold there for faith, for fame, or just for bragging rights. You lean back, staring up at the stars, stars that every caravan learned by heart. The sky was their GPS, the North Star, a lifeline. Orion's belt, a reminder of seasons. The rising of certain constellations marked the best times to travel or the worst. Some believed certain stars whispered to those who listened. And no, that's not entirely metaphor. One fringe belief recorded in some obscure Persian astrology manuals claimed that the desert's silence allowed starlight to echo in the bones. Sound dramatic, maybe, but after a few sleepless nights in the cold, under a sky like this, you'd start believing weird things too. Now imagine how these routes changed everything. A merchant from Persia arrives in Medina and hears about a prophet named Muhammad. A Christian monk in Jerusalem reads a report on Zoroastrian fire temples. A tribal chief in southern Arabia drinks wine made from grapes grown in northern Mesopotamia and decides he doesn't hate his neighbor that week. The trade routes blurred borders, but they also gave people reasons to draw new ones. Control the path, control the goods. Control the goods, control the wealth. And wealth, as we know, rarely shows up alone. It usually brings ambition, which is why tonight, as the stars glitter above the dust, you begin to see the outlines of all the coming tensions. This wasn't just about holy books. It was about who could buy the ink, own the press, and tax the reader. You pull your robe a little tighter against the night chill, and as the moon dips lower, you hear it again, the faint jingle of a camel's bell. Or maybe it's just your imagination. Either way, the road is still whispering, and it's leading you east toward a place that once ruled all of this with such polish, its name still echoes through the region. Babylon. Whispers, Persia rises. The Persian Empire builds more than palaces. It plants roots that still cause squabbles. The first light of dawn spreads over a low ridge to the east, washing the hills in that quiet golden hush that only shows up before people start asking each other for taxes. You stir from where you've been resting, beside the old caravanserai wall, sand still clinging to your sleeves, and your gaze turns to the horizon where the great empire of Persia once unrolled itself like a velvet scroll. And not just once, mind you. This was a region that made a habit of coming back. From the Achaemenids to the Sassanids, Persia didn't just rise. It rebranded, restructured, and usually rebuilt grander than before. Their motto might as well have been New Dynasty. Same timeless vibe. Let's rewind. You're now walking along a wide stone road, impressive, straight, built with a kind of overachiever precision, and you've just entered the edge of the Achaemenid Empire around 500 BCE. You glance up. Inscribed on a slab nearby are the words of Darius, the great king of kings, defender of order, bureaucratic enthusiast. Mainstream historical fact: the Achaemenid Empire was one of the largest in human history, stretching from the Indus Valley to the Aegean Sea. It pioneered administrative zones, standardized coinage, and used a mail system so fast even modern couriers would blush. And yet, Persia wasn't just roads and taxes. It was myth and memory, layered like incense smoke over stone. Temples to Ahura Mazda, the wise lord. Fire altars kept constantly aflame. Stone reliefs of kings handing over rings of power to winged divine figures. You don't need to believe in Zoroastrianism to feel the weight of it all pressing gently on your spirit. The ruins around you, whisper of columns, taller than palm trees, of royal gardens fed by underground qanats of peacocks, and dates served on gold platters, though that part may have been poetic exaggeration. Probably. Fringe detail. In one corner of an old Achaemenid site, archaeologists found what appears to be a small board game similar to backgammon, carved into a floor stone. Theories range from soldiers killing time to secret divination ritual. But either way, turns out even ancient empires had a game night. As you walk, your sandals scuff across tiles, still echoing with ambition. The Persian kings didn't conquer for fun. They did it for order. That's what they said anyway. A world under one law. And in theory, that law included religious tolerance, fair taxation, and a sort of multi-ethnic HR department for the ancient world. But of course, not everyone loved being part of the grand design. Historians still argue whether Persian rule in the Levant and Arabia was genuinely welcomed by local leaders or just endured until someone better or louder came along. Either way, this region spent a few centuries bouncing between autonomy, rebellion, and diplomatic shrugs. You stop at a crumbled outpost. Once it would have housed Persian scribes, military commanders, and priests. Now it's just lizards, cracked columns, and wind. You sit for a moment and take it all in. From this high perch, you can see why Persia mattered so much to this region, not just geographically, but symbolically. Persia wasn't just a neighbor. It was a shadow, a standard, a reminder that grandness wasn't just possible, it was expected. And it shaped how everyone thought about rulers, about gods, about what history was supposed to look like. Even as the Achaemenids gave way to the Seleucids, thanks Alexander, and later the Parthians and Sassanids, the Persian frame remained. Each new group that rose, Arabs, Jews, Romans, Byzantines, they didn't just fight Persia. They reacted to it. Persia was the measuring stick, the rival legacy. It had the infrastructure, the fire, the literature, and the occasionally overwhelming self-regard. Quirky twist. 1. Sassanid King Khosrow II reportedly had a throne suspended by chains from the ceiling to show that he literally ruled above everyone. It was dramatic. It was probably uncomfortable, but it certainly sent a message. You lean back, staring into the sunrise. You imagine what it felt like for a traveler walking westward, leaving Persepolis behind, and approaching the contested cities of the Holy Land. That mix of confidence and dread, the awareness that you might be entering not just another kingdom, but another cosmic alignment. Because that's the secret ingredient, Persia wasn't just politics, it was cosmology. It believed in a universal battle between truth and falsehood. And like it or not, most of the region's later conflicts borrowed this black and white template, replacing fire with scripture but keeping the vibe. The borderlands between Persia and the Holy Land weren't just military frontiers, they were ideological thresholds. You rise, dusting your robes, and begin walking again. The wind kicks up gently, carrying with it the scent of dried thyme and distant goats. You're headed west now, toward the place where that threshold became very, very personal. Toward a land where one city, small, dusty, precariously perched, would become the spiritual center of 3 global religions. a place where stories collided, beliefs ossified, and people began claiming that even the rocks beneath their feet had divine signatures. But before you get there, take one last look back. The great empire of Persia stands in memory steady and vast. It won't vanish. It never does for long. It just waits, like a carved inscription, faint but still legible. The many gods problem, competing pantheons and early monotheism turned theology into regional sport. You follow a dusty slope downward, away from the highlands of ancient Persia, and into lands where hills roll like waves and olive groves whisper secrets to the wind. The path grows narrower here, flanked by crumbling terraces and scattered goat droppings, because some things never change. The road you're on now winds toward a city you have probably heard of, Jerusalem. It's been called many things: sacred, cursed, central, peripheral. And, depending on who you ask, it's either the beginning of the world or a place no one sensible should ever try to govern. Tonight we're tracing how Jerusalem and the Holy Land became the world's most competitive spiritual real estate, and how three belief systems, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, layered meaning over the same stones, often within arm's reach of each other. You pause near a ridge and look out. The sun is rising slowly, casting gold across scattered stone homes, fig trees, and faint lines of smoke from morning bread fires. It's peaceful now. But that peace has always been hard-won here, sometimes barely rented. Mainstream historical anchor. By the 1st century CE, Jerusalem had already seen more than its fair share of empires. Babylonians, Persians, Greeks, Romans, all leaving behind broken walls, syncretized holidays, and very exhausted local elders. You stroll past a hillside dotted with tombs, some Jewish ossuaries, others carved with Greek inscriptions, a few that probably belonged to Roman officers who died of either illness or politics, whichever came first. It's a visual reminder that this land didn't belong to one people. It was layered like sediment. Each century added a belief, a shrine, a holy footprint. Now, here's a fringe detail you didn't expect. Archaeologists have found tiny metal amulets near ancient synagogues, often inscribed with protective prayers, not in Hebrew or Greek, but in Aramaic, with magical symbols. Think ancient holy language meets Dungeons and Dragons. And yes, people probably tucked them into sandals or cloaks before long walks, just in case. You keep walking, feet crunching on gravel as sunlight warms the path. Somewhere nearby, pilgrims once climbed a hill, chanting psalms. Not far from that, Roman troops sharpened blades and complained about the dry wine. Later, monks would plant herbs here. Still, later, Islamic jurists would write legal opinions by candlelight just steps away. Three faiths, one city, often no clear lines between reverence and rivalry. Historians still argue whether early Christian claims over specific sites in Jerusalem were politically motivated rebrandings or sincere spiritual revelations. The line between holy vision and real estate strategy is, let's say, delicately blurred. You reach a gate stone, low-arched, chipped at the edges, and step through. Beyond it lies the Temple Mount. It's quiet in your imagination, though. In real life, it's rarely anything but vibrant and crowded. Here once stood the Jewish temple, heart of ancient worship and sacrifice. Later, it would become the site of the Dome of the Rock, a jewel-toned octagon where Muslims believe the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven. A place layered with reverence and wound tightly with theology. The weight of it presses in, but gently, like a thick wool blanket instead of a burden. A quiet aside, there's a theory disputed, of course, that early Jewish pilgrims would carry palm-sized carved stones from Jerusalem home with them to place in their gardens or doorways, a way of bringing a touch of sacred soil wherever they went. And that's what this place became, not just a city, but an idea, a symbol, a portable metaphor. Jerusalem was dreamed about, sung about, fought for by people who had never touched its gates. You sit for a moment in the shade of an old olive tree, whose roots probably remember more wars than you do your high school locker combination. You listen to the breeze. You imagine the murmurs of prayer from three directions: Hebrew, Latin, Arabic, sometimes harmonious, often not. In truth, the competition for this land wasn't just religious. It was emotional, existential. If your people's origin story said you belonged here, how could anyone else's version possibly be right? So you ended up with layers. Synagogues built over altars, churches built over synagogues, mosques built beside both. And sometimes, this part's weird, they all use the same water cisterns. Spiritual conflict meets plumbing efficiency. As you rise, the scent of thyme and sun-warmed stone wraps around you. Your next steps will lead you deeper into the tension between these three overlapping claims. But for now, pause. Soak in the quiet. Let the ghosts of pilgrims, prophets, and puzzled administrators pass you by, because the Holy Land wasn't just fought over for belief. It was fought over because belief brought bodies. Bodies needed food, beds, city walls. And soon that meant governments. And when governments and faith share a bed well, the sheets rarely stay smooth. So, as you take your next steps, remember this. Jerusalem's beauty lies not in its certainty, but in its contradictions, sacred and scarred, desired and discarded, echoing with praise and politics. You move on your path, veering toward the sea, where new powers are rising, powers with banners, ships, and an inconvenient appetite for crusading. But for now, just enjoy the olive trees. They don't care who rules. They just grow. Jerusalem, tiny city, giant drama. This sacred hilltop city quietly becomes the center of everyone's arguments. You follow a winding trail, west your sandals slipping occasionally on loose pebbles, the breeze brushing your face like parchment, turning under a scholar's hand. Before long, you find yourself near the glinting horizon, where the edge of the Mediterranean meets the ambition of Rome. This is where things shift, where ancient Jewish hills and Persian memory give way to a new sort of conqueror, not one who burns temples outright well, sometimes, but one who rebrands them into something marble-lined and officially approved by the emperor. Tonight you're walking into the world of the Romans and Byzantines, two empires so in love with order they practically invented new fonts for their inscriptions. Mainstream historical anchor after the Jewish-Roman wars in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE, most notably the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. Rome took a firm grip on Judea, and by firm we mean don't even think about rebelling again. You pause at the edge of an old Roman road. The stones are wide, slightly bowed from centuries of footsteps, and every few yards there's the ghost of a milestone. The kind of infrastructure that says, yes, we taxed your goats, but we also gave you sidewalks. It's peaceful here now. You can imagine Roman governors in white togas making awkward conversation with local priests, trying to understand dietary laws while eating olives with the wrong spoon. Fringe detail. In one Roman garrison near the coast, archaeologists discovered a graffitied poem in Latin crudely etched into a wall that appears to insult a centurion's cooking, proof that military rations were as controversial then as they are now. You continue past rows of carved columns, remnants of bathhouses, forums, basilicas. Jerusalem became Aelia Capitolina under Emperor Hadrian, a Roman city with temples to Jupiter, forbidden entry to Jews, and plenty of red-tiled roofs. Even the name change was a statement. This land belongs to Rome now, and Rome names things. But the Jewish identity of the region didn't vanish. It simmered, quietly, sometimes underground, sometimes in whispered prayers, sometimes in coded inscriptions on gravestones. Rome could pave over holy ground, but it couldn't erase yearning. Historians still argue whether the Roman and later Byzantine suppression of Jewish practice in the Holy Land was purely pragmatic politics or a deliberate attempt at cultural erasure. Either way, it didn't work long term. By the 4th century CE, Christianity had gone imperial, and suddenly the region's spiritual tone changed faster than you can say Nicene Creed. Churches sprouted like spring flowers after a Galilean rainstorm. Pilgrimages became a thing. Relics were the new luxury goods. You pass through the shadow of a crumbling Byzantine basilica, its mosaic floor half covered in dust. Little fish and loaves swim across tessellated tiles, oblivious to the centuries. You crouch, brushing your fingers over blue and red glass pieces, trying not to think about how many tour groups probably trampled this. Just beyond the apse, you imagine a candlelit altar, a bishop in embroidered robes, chanting in Greek, the smell of incense, and maybe, just maybe, a local farmer whispering an older prayer under his breath when no one was watching. Here's something quirky in several early Byzantine churches. Archaeologists found scratched-in footprints, pilgrims marking the spots where they had stood in holy presence. It's like ancient check-ins, except less data harvesty. And yet, for all the architecture and gospel glow, the Holy Land remained tense. Byzantium brought theological bureaucracy to a land already saturated with meaning. Christological debates sometimes turned violent. Monks fought over doctrinal footnotes, and occasionally over who got the good olive oil for communion. You walk west toward the coast, where ships once arrived from Constantinople, bearing relics, letters from emperors, and the occasional confused diplomat who forgot to pack sandals. The shoreline sparkles, but behind it all lies anxiety, because Byzantium could never fully control the spiritual power of the region. It was too diverse, too emotional, too old. And in the desert beyond, new voices were stirring. You sit for a moment on a mossy stone wall, once part of an aqueduct, and sip from a flask of imaginary date wine. It's tart, slightly fermented, possibly questionable, but it goes down warm. The sun dips slightly, casting long shadows from shattered statues. You watch as two birds circle the remains of a Roman column. You wonder how many soldiers leaned on that pillar, waiting for orders. How many pilgrims touched it for luck? How many children climbed it when no one was looking? Rome and Byzantium left their mark here, not just in laws or architecture, but in the expectation that this land would always matter, that whoever held it must be right. It's a dangerous assumption, but an enduring one. So as you gather your cloak and walk inland once more, the wind from the sea at your back, remember this: the road to the Holy Land's heart is always lined with empires, and every empire thinks it's the last. Spoiler alert, they're wrong. Rome marches in peace, marches out. Roman rule stirs rebellion, exile, and some seriously long grudges. You step inland now across a baked plain where the wind smells faintly of cumin and dust. The air is changing. The hills ahead shimmer gently beneath the late afternoon sun. And somewhere out there, beyond the bend in the horizon, a whisper is gaining volume. A whisper carried not on silk or parchment, but on the rhythm of recitation. It's the 7th century CE, and you're about to walk straight into the birth of Islam, not with a clash, not yet, but with a ripple that will reshape this land more deeply than any legion ever could. Your path takes you through a bustling desert market, date stalls, camel harnesses, and a debate over whether honey water really cures everything. Around you, the sense of something new forming, quiet reverence mixed with camel complaints. Mainstream anchor. In the early 600s, the Prophet Muhammad began receiving revelations that would form the Quran, and within a few short decades, Muslim armies led by caliphs and inspired by religious mission swept across the Arabian Peninsula, through Persia, and yes, into the Holy Land. You pause beside a caravanserai wall, fingers tracing the smooth, sun-bleached stone. Not far from here, the Rashidun Caliphate would take Jerusalem in 637 CE peacefully after negotiations. It wasn't a siege or bloodbath, just a change of guard and a new direction for the city's soul. Here's a quirky moment. When Caliph Umar visited Jerusalem after its peaceful handover, legend says he refused to pray inside the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, not out of disrespect, but to avoid future Muslims turning the church into a mosque. A small gesture with massive historical echoes. The city's name didn't change this time, but the way it was viewed did. Under Islam, Jerusalem became Al-Quds, the holy, a place of divine ascent, and some argued the third holiest city in Islam, after Mecca and Medina. You wander deeper into the city. Minarets rise, now slender and elegant, echoing with the call to prayer. The streets are lined with souk stalls, water sellers, students of hadith, and scribes copying texts by oil lamp. The Christian monks are still here too, just keeping their heads down. And through all of this slow, deliberate layering of Islamic presence, the city remains sacred to Jews, sacred to Christians, and now sacred to Muslims. That's a lot of reverence packed into one uneven hill. Historians still argue whether early Islamic interest in Jerusalem was driven more by spiritual devotion or strategic prestige, especially as the new religion needed to define itself within an already holy region. Either way, the results are carved in stone, literally. You stroll into the Umayyad era, now late 600s, and the skyline changes again. At its heart, the Dome of the Rock. Not a mosque exactly, but a shrine built around the foundation stone, believed to be the place of Abraham's near sacrifice and the Prophet Muhammad's night journey into heaven. It's not subtle. It's octagonal, gold-domed and stunning, a statement in architecture, and maybe, just maybe, a little bit of a spiritual flex, a fringe detail. Some researchers believe the dome's elaborate mosaic inscriptions, written in graceful Kufic script, were partially designed to counter Christian theology, not by tearing it down, but by writing Quranic verses in radiant tilework. It's like holy subtext in stained glass. You sit in the courtyard and breathe in the scent of warm stone and crushed mint. Pigeons flutter from lintel to lintel. A group of travelers argues about whether the journey to Jerusalem should count as Hajj adjacent. One guy swears it's at least spiritually adjacent. As Islam grows in strength, this land becomes a center of governance as well. Administrative Arabic replaces Greek and Latin in many records. Tax collectors start showing up with slightly different questions, but the people mostly stay the same. A merchant might still sell figs from the same cart his grandfather used. A widow might light a lamp and offer prayers in all three directions, just in case. And though rulers change, you notice a surprising amount of interfaith coexistence. Not always equal, not always peaceful, but coexisting nonetheless. Christians pay a special tax, yes, but churches remain. Jewish communities thrive in pockets. Dialogue occurs in markets as much as in mosques. You stop at a fountain, cupping cool water to your face. A boy beside you hums a lullaby in Arabic, his sandals dangling off the edge. Nearby, an old Greek Orthodox monk hands him a fig. No one makes a fuss. It wasn't utopia, but it wasn't apocalypse either. That's the thing people forget most. History doesn't happen in headlines. It happens in quiet adaptation, in small trades, shared wells, tolerated differences. So, you rise adjusting your robe and begin your walk toward the next century, when tolerance will be tested, ambitions will harden, and the spiritual chessboard of the Holy Land will gain new foreign players with helmets and crosses. But for now, the sun is warm, the voices blend gently, and for just this moment, three faiths breathe side by side. Deserts of prophecy and politics. Muhammad's rise reshapes the region and redraws the board entirely. The road ahead hums softly beneath your feet as the scent of olive groves thins into the arid wind. You pause atop a low ridge, eyes scanning a land that feels older than memory, and just beyond it, ships crest the horizon. No, not merchants, not pilgrims, not caliphs. Tonight you're walking into the era of the Crusades, a time when armored ambition rode east on horseback, clutching swords, and holy intent in equal measure. It's going to get uncomfortable, so you pull your hood up and keep to the shadows. Mainstream historical fact. In 1099 CE, the First Crusade reached Jerusalem, launched by Pope Urban II in response to calls for help from the Byzantine Empire and a deeply spiritual desire, albeit occasionally weaponized, to reclaim the Holy Land from Muslim rule. They succeeded violently. The city was captured, and the Kingdom of Jerusalem was born in blood and Latin inscriptions. It's not bedtime material unless you skip the body count, which, for sleep's sake, we absolutely will. You follow the Crusaders' path through Antioch, past crumbling fortresses, through blistering heat and unfamiliar terrain. Most of them had never even seen camels before. One knight apparently mistook one for a horse with a growth problem. The Holy Land, under Crusader rule, looks oddly Franco-Norman stone castles with butter towers, Gothic arches stuck awkwardly into Eastern cityscapes, and churches built directly atop old mosques and temples like theological stacking dolls. You sneak into a Crusader outpost. There's a man polishing his chainmail in the corner, humming a Gregorian chant with the rhythm of a drinking song. Someone's cooking something tragic in a bronze pot, probably barley porridge with the personality of damp linen. Quirky detail. The Crusaders brought with them European farming tools that didn't work well in Middle Eastern soil, like trying to plow a desert with a snow shovel. Eventually, they adapted, but not before more than a few confused oxen wandered off. You head toward Jerusalem again now, under Christian rule. The city is eerily quiet. The air carries the tension of occupation. Latin monks chant in chapels built over synagogues. Muslim call to prayer is silent now. Hebrew scriptures are hidden in walls. Historians still argue whether the Crusades were primarily religious warfare or a combination of economic ambition, political opportunity, and misguided apocalyptic expectations. Probably yes to all three. In some quarters, Muslims and Jews were expelled, or worse. But in others, communities found uneasy rhythms. After all, someone still had to bake bread, fix doors, and run bathhouses. Life stumbles forward even under foreign flags. And yet, the Crusaders weren't just warriors. Some wrote poetry, like Crusader troubadours, composing verses by candlelight in the same tents that stored crossbows. One described the moon rising over Jerusalem as a pearl of God's longing. Points for metaphor, if not for humility. You duck into a small church, its walls still covered in flaking frescoes of saints with oddly wide eyes. At the altar, a crusader's helmet sits next to a local ceramic lamp, side by side, in uneasy conversation. A bishop nearby tries to learn Arabic. He's struggling. He keeps mistaking "peace be upon you" for "I've misplaced my horse." Happens more than you'd think. Outside, the market's half empty. Trade continues, but it limps. The spice routes have shifted. Some locals whisper rumors of Saladin, a rising Muslim leader gathering strength to reclaim what was lost. You imagine the future trembling slightly. And indeed, in 1187, Saladin will retake Jerusalem, almost a mirror image of its conquest a century earlier. This time, the handover is merciful. Civilians are spared. Sacred sites are respected. It's a rare chapter in this saga, where the victors act more like librarians than conquerors. A fringe footnote here: Saladin allegedly gave out refreshments to the defeated cool water and dates. A moment of hospitality, carved into legend, real or exaggerated, but still echoing through children's books to this day. You move now among scattered crusader fortresses, some still imposing, some crumbling like pastries. They dot the land like chess pieces, long since forgotten by the players. The Templars, the Hospitallers, all left their marks and their debts. Eventually, the Crusader hold on the region falters. One by one, cities fall, treaties break, ships stop arriving from Europe. The kingdom of heaven closes its doors, not with a bang, but with a bored customs officer saying, "We're not renewing your charter." But something deeper remains. Pilgrimage, routes, cross-cultural vocabulary, and bitter memories that will last centuries longer than the steel armor ever did. You camp for the night near an abandoned crusader cistern, listening to the wind rustling through dry grass. It carries a soft, hollow whistle, like a lament, or maybe just a breeze through old stones. Either way, sleep comes easily tonight, because tomorrow the land changes hands again and again and again. Because this is the Holy Land after all, and history here is a roundabout with no exits, caliphs, cousins, and confusing inheritance. Sunni Shia tensions simmer from family feuds to full-scale empires. You stir from your sleep beneath the cool arch of a crusader cistern. The wind carries that faint mineral smell, ancient water and time. You sit up, dusting sand from your robe, and notice the first pale light over the eastern hills. Another century waits. The crusaders have been swept away mostly. Some fled by sea. Some stayed quietly absorbed into local rhythms. Their castles crumble. Their Latin tongues fade. And yet their story lingers like spice residue in a well-used mortar. Now you walk into an age of shifting dynasties, where Islamic rulers reclaim the land and build new cities on the bones of old conquests. The Ayyubid dynasty, led by Saladin and his descendants, gives way to the Mamluks, a warrior class of enslaved soldiers turned sultans. Mainstream historical fact. By the late 13th century, the Mamluks control most of the Levant, including Jerusalem. They're fiercely independent, famously disciplined, and oddly enough, huge fans of monumental architecture. If there's a flat surface, they'll carve a calligraphy panel into it. You wander into a Mamluk-era bathhouse in Jerusalem. Inside vaulted ceilings, trickling fountains, and an old man snoring under a eucalyptus-infused steam vent. The air smells like warm lemons and soapstone. Outside, the city shifts yet again. New madrasas, khans, and mosques rise alongside ancient ruins. A scribe selling prayer scrolls insists the Mamluks made the best ink-deep, inky black with a hint of mulberry. You buy a sample. He throws in a free quill because you look poetic. Here's a quirky tidbit. The Mamluks implemented zoning laws to separate noisy industries like blacksmithing from sacred sites. It's one of the earliest known urban planning attempts in the Islamic world, and possibly why Jerusalem doesn't smell like horseshoes and charcoal 24/7. You move now through Cairo, Damascus, Aleppo, all interconnected with the Holy Land through trade and pilgrimage. There's a rhythm to it: prayer, commerce, learning, rest, repeat. These cities become cultural lighthouses, their glow stretching into Jerusalem's alleys like silk threads. Historians still argue whether the Mamluks' emphasis on religious patronage, building schools, mosques, and shrines, was genuine piety or just a clever way to legitimize their rule as former enslaved warriors. Either way, their fingerprints remain on every stone staircase. You pause at a caravanserai outside Nablus, where travelers swap riddles over lentils and figs. A Persian merchant insists that goat milk prevents aging. The Syrian next to him nods solemnly, despite having 3 visible wrinkles and a goat that looks unconvinced. The Holy Land during this period is mostly Muslim-controlled, but with pockets of Christians, Jews, Samaritans, and more, all navigating subtle balances of power and tax. The term people of the book gets you certain protections and occasional paperwork headaches. One dusty manuscript you find describes a Jewish physician in Jerusalem paid handsomely by a Muslim sultan for his work with eye diseases. Turns out cataracts have no religion. You walk the Via Dolorosa at dusk. Candlelight flickers from a Franciscan chapel. Down the street, a Quranic recitation hums softly from a courtyard. Across the plaza, a small group of Armenian monks tries to hang a tapestry without falling off a ladder. You offer to help. They politely decline. It's not harmony, but it's not war either. And still the European gaze never fully turns away. Pilgrims return, sometimes sponsored by kings, sometimes by their own restless feet. They bring back relics, rumors, and a growing sense that control over this land isn't just about God, it's about prestige. Fringe fact: some 14th century European maps place Jerusalem at the geographic center of the world. A little inaccurate, sure, but it tells you everything about how the West viewed this place as cosmic compass point, moral anchor, and political bargaining chip. And you're still walking through arches, across courtyards, under minarets and bell towers. You pass a group of children playing with hand-carved dice. One rolls a 6 and claims he's the caliph now. His sister throws sand in his eye. You sit with an old Mamluk librarian who insists that if the world ends, it will begin again in Jerusalem. You ask what he means. He just sips his tea. You can feel something shifting. The Mongols are far off in the east. The Ottomans are rising in Anatolia. And Europe is muttering again. New ambitions brew. New flags are being sown. But for now, the city holds, quietly, carefully. You breathe in its twilight stone dust, jasmine, and ink. And beneath your feet, history continues to smolder. The Persian comeback tour, the Safavid revival, paints the region Shia green, and everyone else sees red. You leave the librarian behind, still sipping his tea, like he's waiting for time itself to unravel at his feet. Outside Jerusalem yawns into evening. Again, a familiar rhythm. By now calls to prayer, fluttering like laundry in the breeze. Slow-moving donkeys, clopping toward shaded courtyards, and the distant aroma of cardamom and chickpeas drifting from a vendor's clay oven. You know this moment can't last, because something enormous is stirring to the north, the Ottoman Empire. Mainstream historical fact: in 1517, the Ottomans under Selim I conquer the Mamluks and absorb the Holy Land into their vast empire. What begins as a power shift soon becomes a long, surprisingly stable chapter, or centuries of Ottoman rule over Jerusalem, Palestine, and much of Arabia. You head north through Damascus and Aleppo, where imperial banners already flap lazily above ancient gates. Ottoman scribes are re-inventorying everything: Wells roads, olive groves, tax ledgers, even how many chickens a widow owns. There's no such thing as too much data for a sultan. You arrive in Jerusalem just in time to witness the restoration boom. Under Suleiman the Magnificent, yes, that's really what they called him, the city walls are rebuilt, fountains repaired, markets reorganized. It's like the municipal office suddenly discovered ambition. Quirky tidbit: Suleiman allegedly had his architects bury a time capsule in one of the city gates, a scroll with Quranic verses and coins for whoever digs here in the end times. Which sounds dramatic, but also kind of sweet. You stroll along the newly fortified ramparts walk, then duck into the old city, where Ottoman influence is visible in every lintel and dome-tiled medallions. Horse hitching posts carved with pomegranates, iron balconies that look like they're holding their breath. The Holy Land, under Ottoman rule, becomes a kind of delicate patchwork. Religious minorities, Armenians, Copts, Syriac Christians, Sephardic Jews, Druze, all have millet status, meaning semi-autonomous governance under their own leaders. It's tolerance with footnotes. Sure, but a clever way to reduce open rebellion. Historians still argue whether the Ottomans treated the Holy Land as a genuine spiritual center or more of a remote tax province that occasionally needed sweeping. The answer seems to be both, depending on who was sultan and how many wars were happening that month. In any case, you spot a janissary eating grilled eggplant while half listening to a sermon. A Greek Orthodox merchant is arguing with a Turkish guard over fig prices. A rabbi walks past muttering about cracked floor tiles in the synagogue. Somehow it all functions. You spend a night at the Khan al-Sultan, a caravanserai, where you overhear a Sufi mystic explaining the metaphysical properties of cinnamon to a bored spice trader. Cinnamon, he says, remembers the Garden of Eden. The spice trader replies, cinnamon forgets nothing. Markets bustle with Ottoman imports, embroidered slippers, from Bursa, brass lamps, from Damascus, sugar, from Egypt. You get distracted by a man selling rosewater ice, shaved with a curved blade into ceramic cups. It tastes like chilled perfume. You regret it immediately. By the 17th century, the Holy Land is quieter. No crusades, no Mongol hordes, no vast theological convulsions. Just pilgrims, taxes, plagues, and the occasional earthquake to keep things interesting. You spend an afternoon in Bethlehem. A Franciscan friar is patching up the Church of the Nativity. He offers you some wine made by Armenian monks. It's robust, he adds. It keeps the ghosts away. You drink it anyway. Fringe fact: Ottoman postal systems included pigeon towers with trained birds carrying messages between Jerusalem and Cairo. Some even had tiny leather harnesses. One source describes a particularly arrogant pigeon that refused to land unless someone clapped. The Ottomans keep building. Schools, hospitals, soup kitchens. One noble woman endows a public fountain because she wanted travelers to drink without thirst or thanks. It still trickles today, guarded by pigeons and a cat that takes her job very seriously. And yet, as centuries pass, cracks appear. Roads go unrepaired. Corruption sneaks in like mold under tiles. Foreign powers, Britain, France, Russia, start sending more consuls and explorers and random people with binoculars and opinions. You're standing at the edge of the 1800s now. The Ottoman grip is loose like fingers gone numb in winter, and the world, it's changing fast. Trains, telegraphs, photography, empire modernity, and 1,000 bad decisions wait just beyond the next hill. But for tonight, Jerusalem sleeps. A night breeze rustles through olive trees planted during Suleiman's reign. Somewhere, a muezzin clears his throat. You can hear the creak of a wagon wheel, the whisper of prayer on parchment, and the soft crunch of boots on old stone. And in that breath of stillness, you realize this land so often fought over has known more centuries of quiet than of fire. It's just that peace, like water, rarely leaves a mark. Crusaders, not great house guests. Europe shows up uninvited starts. Centuries of awkward religious house parties. You awake to the clip-clop of hooves on cobblestone and the faint clang of a tin kettle in the distance. The sun rises reluctantly, casting a dusty glow over a land that's beginning to smell more like bureaucracy and empire than parchment and prayer. The Holy Land is shifting again this time, under the careful gaze of European diplomats, archaeologists, and agents with too many maps and not enough context. Welcome to the 19th century. Mainstream historical fact as the Ottoman Empire weakens the Holy Land, becomes a theater for European interference. France supports Catholic interests. Russia backs Orthodox Christians. And Britain, well, Britain does what Britain always does, set up consulates and act mysteriously. You stroll through Jerusalem and notice that French nuns are teaching music near Jaffa Gate, while British surveyors argue over where exactly King David might have stepped. There's also an American painter trying to capture the biblical light, but all he gets is a sunburn and a goat photobombing his canvas. Alongside the diplomacy, there's a strange new wave, biblical tourism. Earnest Victorians in heavy skirts and stiff collars are arriving by boatload, carrying Bibles, umbrellas, and a deep conviction that they'll find Noah's Ark just lying around somewhere. You meet a German pilgrim who swears he saw the burning bush. You gently suggest it was probably a thorny shrub set on fire by accident. He's unconvinced and offers to sell you a charred twig as proof. You decline. Quirky tidbit. A British officer once measured the exact length of the Via Dolorosa using his wife's parasol and insisted his measurements were accurate to the inch. Historians remain politely skeptical. All this attention brings new infrastructure. Railways are built. Telegraph wires hum. Jerusalem gets street lamps, gas-powered flickery, slightly haunted-looking street lamps, but still, the modern world is arriving, like it or not. Historians still argue whether this period marks a true awakening of global interest in the Holy Land or just an early form of spiritual sightseeing mixed with colonial ambition. Probably a bit of both, especially if the travelers brought sandwiches. You sit with a local Arab farmer in a cafe built on Roman stones. He's unimpressed by the tourists. They come looking for Jesus, he says. They leave with postcards. Then he offers you fresh dates and a sip of arak. You accept. It tastes like licorice and confusion. Meanwhile, local communities continue living their layered ancient routines. Muslim, Christian, and Jewish neighborhoods hum with life children chasing chickens, women baking flatbread in outdoor ovens, elders trading gossip with the gravity of court scribes. A Jewish scholar from Safed visits Jerusalem to study Kabbalistic scrolls, which he claims whisper at night. A Bedouin shepherd sells you a pouch of blue stones, saying they're from the stream where Abraham once rested. You don't ask which Abraham. It feels rude. Fringe fact. In the 1860s, American Christians tried to found a colony near Jaffa, believing they could farm the land, as in biblical times. They brought farm tools, prayer books, and uncomfortable shoes. It didn't go well. Turns out they also forgot water. You notice more and more foreign buildings appearing European consulates, hospitals, schools. There's even a German-built windmill outside Jerusalem that never catches the wind. A metaphor, maybe, or just poor placement. One day, a British officer in a tight-fitting uniform invites you to a lecture on the geographic logic of holy topography. It's 3 hours long, includes 6 maps, and ends with a biscuit. You pretend to take notes. The biscuit is stale. By the late 1800s, everyone wants a piece of the place. Ottoman rule still technically holds, but it's becoming a tangled web of permissions, petitions, and behind-the-scenes deals. A bishop might be escorted by Ottoman guards and argued over by Russian monks all before breakfast. And all the while, locals adapt. They roll their eyes. They rebuild. They keep telling stories by lamplight and planting olives with the patience of centuries. In a stone workshop near Nazareth, you help a stonemason etch a lintel. He carves slowly, carefully, muttering prayers under his breath. The land remembers everything he says. We just have to listen. At night, the streets are quieter again. A donkey brays, a candle gutters, a group of Armenian musicians plays a mournful melody by a chapel gate. You sit on a worn step and watch the stars settle like dust across the sky. You realize that even when the world arrives with flags and measuring sticks and missionary zeal, this land never truly belongs to anyone. It waits. It watches. It endures. And you're just passing through Another pair of curious eyes in a long line stretching back to the days when prophets walked and ink first kissed parchment. Mongols, Mamluks, and the meltdown. Steppe thunder meets desert heat in a chaos cocktail of invasions. The night deepens, and your footsteps echo through the narrow alleys of Jaffa. Gone are the Roman coins and Ottoman pigeons. Now you're brushing past British soldiers, bureaucrats, and railway inspectors in the crisp uniforms of empire. The date, early 20th century. The empire. The British one. Yes, again, mainstream historical fact after World War I. The Ottoman Empire dissolves like sugar in tea, and the British mandate for Palestine is established under League of Nations authority in 1920. The Holy Land is now officially a British colonial possession. You watch a Union Jack go up in Jerusalem, an awkward moment, even for a flag. The British bring with them roads, census forms, cricket poorly attended, and most importantly, administrative chaos with a monocle. You sit in on a town meeting where British officers try to explain new property tax codes to local elders. One villager mutters, "We understood the Romans better." Another asks if he can pay in goats. The officers decline nervously. Quirky tidbit. There's a brief British attempt to install red phone boxes in Jerusalem. They work fine, until neighborhood goats begin sleeping in them. One box is officially retired after becoming a bee sanctuary. All jokes aside, this is the turning point. A century's worth of tension begins to compress like a spring. British promises both to Zionist leaders and to Arab communities start overlapping in increasingly incompatible ways. You leaf through the Balfour Declaration, a short but explosive British letter from 1917 supporting a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. At the same time, British officials reassure Arab leaders that they support independence after the war. Historians still argue whether this double dealing was intentional sabotage or just the result of very tired colonial administrators. Meanwhile, the population grows rapidly. Jewish immigration increases under the pressure of European anti-Semitism and rising Zionist movements. Arab Palestinians grow more alarmed. British officials mostly try to schedule more meetings. Tensions simmer. Land purchases, unemployment, language disputes. You visit a village where a farmer teaches his children Hebrew in the morning and Arabic in the afternoon. He says it keeps the arguments balanced. One evening, you sip thick coffee with a young Jewish teacher from Tel Aviv and a Palestinian calligrapher from Hebron. They argue about land poetry and olives. They both agree that the British make terrible tea. Fringe fact. In 1929, a British archaeologist in Jerusalem accidentally sparks a small riot by misidentifying a pile of ancient stones as part of Solomon's stables. They were, in fact, part of a bakery's cellar. A very old bakery, admittedly, but still. Throughout the 1930s, violence erupts in waves, strikes, uprisings, curfews, and retaliations. You pass a wall plastered with competing flyers, one in Hebrew, one in Arabic, and one in Queen's English. No one reads the last one. You sit under a fig tree with an elderly merchant who's seen 4 flags raised over his courtyard. He shrugs and says, "They always say they'll fix the streets. Never do." As World War II begins, the mandate tightens. British soldiers patrol with weary eyes. Jewish underground groups, some peaceful, some militant, begin organizing against both Arab resistance and British restrictions. And all the while, news trickles in from Europe, ghettos, camps, unimaginable horror. Historians still argue whether Britain could have prevented the coming catastrophe, or if it had already laid down too many fuses. You visit a refugee camp in Haifa. Children play among tents strung with laundry lines. A rabbi holds a broken Torah scroll. A young Arab boy hands you a stolen apple and says, "Don't tell my uncle." Everyone is waiting for something to give, and soon it will. The wind smells like sea salt and sorrow. British rule staggers on, but the land is restless. Borders drawn in pencil start to bleed, and from the hills around you, voices begin to rise, not as echoes of the past, but as the unmistakable call of a future about to crash into the present. Ottoman overshadowing, a long sultanate of uneasy cohabitation and holy site politicking begins. The wind stiffens over the hills of Galilee, and this time it carries more than jasmine and dust. You hear the crackle of radio signals, the clatter of boots on gravel, and the uneasy silence that settles right before something new begins. It's the end of the British Mandate and the beginning of, well, something more complicated. Mainstream historical fact. In 1948, the British formally withdraw from Palestine, and the State of Israel is declared. What follows is the Arab-Israeli War, with armies from Egypt, Jordan, Syria, Iraq, and Lebanon entering the fray. Over 700,000 Palestinians flee or are expelled, what many now call the Nakba, or catastrophe. You walk through a village where both celebration and grief are in the air. Someone sets off fireworks. Someone else boards up their windows. The cats just look confused. The mood is unstable, like a table with too many legs cut at odd angles. In Tel Aviv, you attend a crowded, smoke-filled room where David Ben-Gurion reads aloud the Declaration of Independence. Someone whispers, "Did he really write that on a kitchen table?" Probably not. Historians still argue whether the table was borrowed, broken, or just symbolic. Across the Jordan River, Arab leaders plot countermeasures. In Jerusalem, fighting breaks out. You take cover behind a crumbling wall, once built by the Ottomans, now sheltering journalists, soldiers, and a baker with surprisingly good aim. Quirky tidbit: a group of Jerusalem residents hosted Shabbat dinners by candlelight in bomb shelters, using leftover British Army rations and reciting psalms in 5 different accents. Survival in this region comes seasoned With resilience and oregano, the borders change overnight. The West Bank comes under Jordanian control. Gaza is administered by Egypt. Jerusalem is split east and west, sacred stones now separated by checkpoints and barbed wire. Maps age faster here than bread in the sun. You meet a Christian nun who's been in the old city since 1932. She smiles and says, "Every time they redraw the lines, we just repaint the signs." Her convent walls have bullet holes and a flowering vine that refuses to die. You ride in a shared taxi that crosses 3 zones in 10 minutes. The driver says he's Palestinian, Jordanian, and stateless, depending on who stops the car. He offers you sesame biscuits. You say thank you twice. Tensions mount. Refugees stream into camps. Kibbutzim plant new orchards under the sound of distant shell fire. UN observers arrive with notebooks, binoculars, and expressions of deep concern. Someone always looks deeply concerned. Fringe fact: in the early 1950s, some Israeli farmers reportedly tried to train carrier pigeons to send messages across the newly drawn borders. It mostly resulted in very confused pigeons, and at least one instance of a diplomatic misunderstanding involving bird droppings on a Jordanian jeep. Meanwhile, daily life continues because it has to. A Palestinian tailor sets up shop in a canvas tent. An Israeli librarian sorts books in a shack built from ammunition crates. Children play tag between abandoned armored trucks. You pass through Hebron, where a Jewish settler and an Arab merchant argue over a patch of fig trees. They both claim it was their grandfather's. You ask if it's possible to share. They shrug. Maybe next year. Historians still argue whether the events of 1948 were inevitable, preventable, or just tragically entangled in decades of promises no one could keep. The land itself says nothing. It just keeps absorbing footsteps. And as the dust of war settles for now, you begin to realize that this region doesn't just host history. It collects it, it layers it, and then without warning, it replays it with new costumes and familiar lines. Night falls again. A lantern swings in the breeze above a checkpoint. A boy reads by flashlight in a refugee tent. A woman plants thyme outside a cement apartment with cracked walls and perfect morning light. The conflict is not over, but the people somehow still are. Oil borders and British maps. 20th century lines drawn in sand become long-term headaches. You wake to the growl of engines and the rustle of maps. The 1950s and 60s are here, and they're not subtle. In the distance, bulldozers push earth into new roads, while diplomats push words into new agreements, most of which will be ignored or regretted later. Mainstream historical fact. The borders created after 1948 don't hold for long. Tensions rise again and again, culminating in the Six-Day War of 1967, where Israel launches preemptive strikes and ends up occupying the West Bank, Gaza Strip, Sinai Peninsula, and Golan Heights. You watch from a hillside as Israeli tanks rumble across sand past abandoned shoes and flattened fig orchards. Cairo, Damascus, and Amman fume. The radio hums with contradictions. Victory, says one side. Invasion, says the other. You slip into Jerusalem, which is now unified, though everyone's version of that word seems to mean something else. Barbed wire is cleared away, but suspicion lingers like a shadow at noon. Quirky tidbit. During this time, archaeologists working around the Temple Mount uncover ancient tunnels and immediately cause a minor international crisis. The dig is paused, arguments ensue, and one worker claims he found a Roman coin that definitely looks annoyed. You visit a checkpoint where a soldier is reading poetry. When asked if it helps, he nods and says, "Only the sad stuff." Nearby, a grandmother from Bethlehem hands out pickled olives and advice often simultaneously. Back in the larger region, the oil states, particularly Saudi Arabia and Iran, then still under the Shah, are flexing their muscles. Oil prices, pipelines, and petrodollars begin shaping alliances more powerfully than swords or scrolls ever did. Historians still argue whether this was the beginning of a new era or just a shinier phase of the old pattern clash, regroup, repeat. Across the Persian Gulf, Iran continues its dance with the West. The Shah hosts lavish parties, and women wear miniskirts in Tehran. Meanwhile, discontent simmers beneath the imported marble and American TV reruns. You sip strong tea in Shiraz with a student who whispers that the mosques are getting louder. Over in Arabia, Saudi Arabia solidifies its role as the guardian of Islam's holiest sites, hosting both pilgrims and geopolitical posturing. Its rivalry with Iran is subtle but sharp. Sunnis versus Shia, kingdom versus revolution, to be fringe fact. In the 1970s, Saudi Arabia considered building an artificial mountain to change the desert's weather. The plan was scrapped due to budget issues and presumably physics. Meanwhile, the Palestinians, many now born in exile, grow more organized, more desperate, and more defiant. You sit in a Lebanese refugee camp where children draw maps of homes they've never seen, and a grandmother sings lullabies that somehow sound like protest songs. In 1973, Egypt and Syria launch a surprise attack on Israel during Yom Kippur. The war is short but brutal. Israeli forces push back. U.S. planes resupply. Soviet advisors frown a lot. The Cold War has entered the Holy Land stage, dragging its ice through the sand. You meet a UN translator who carries a notebook full of words no one listens to. They all speak, he says, but not to each other. He gives you a blue helmet as a joke. It's slightly cracked. Oil becomes a weapon. The Arab oil embargo of 1973 drives gas prices sky high around the world. Suddenly, Americans learn what it feels like to queue for something other than coffee. Geopolitics has officially gone mainstream. Historians still argue whether the 1970s could have birthed peace had anyone truly wanted it. There were summits, secret meetings, and handshake photos, but no one seemed to bring the right kind of pen. You sit in a cafe in Beirut, once known as the Paris of the East, watching fashion models, rebels, and foreign journalists all drink the same bitter espresso. The city is lovely, but you can already feel the cracks forming under its tiles. A shepherd in the Golan Heights tells you that the view is best at sunset, but only if no one is firing mortars. He shrugs and offers you pomegranate seeds. They're tart, but strangely comforting. The maps are redrawn again. Borders stretch and wrinkle like old paper. Old grudges learn new languages. And yet, through all of it, people still marry, argue about spices, raise cats, pray at shrines, and tell bedtime stories about prophets and poets who walked the same dust you now brush off your sleeves. Modern states, ancient grudges, new flags, same rivalries, and sacred stones that won't stop glowing. By now, your shoes are worn thin, your satchel filled with maps, both antique and freshly smudged. The 1980s through early 2000s bring satellites, skyscrapers, and slogans, but peace still dodges the headlines like a clever street cat. Mainstream historical fact. After decades of occupation and exile, the Palestinian Liberation Organization, PLO, gains global recognition. In 1987, the First Intifada erupts a grassroots uprising with stone strikes and stubborn hope. In 1993, a sliver of optimism appears as the Oslo Accords are signed, offering a framework for peace and mutual recognition between Israel and the PLO. You hover near the lawn of the White House where Rabin and Arafat shake hands, awkward, historic, and probably too sweaty under those suits. Clinton beams in the middle, like a dad hoping his kids just get along already. It's a moment. But moments are delicate. Quirky tidbit during early Oslo talks in Norway. Negotiators reportedly bonded over waffles and snowball fights because nothing says geopolitical compromise like powdered sugar and temporary frostbite. Historians still argue whether Oslo was a genuine breakthrough or just well-staged theater. The roadmaps were detailed, the hope was real, but so were the roadblocks. Settlements expanded, suicide bombings erupted, and mutual distrust settled back into place like overcooked hummus, sticky and hard to scrape off. You wander Gaza's crowded streets, where a barber keeps cutting hair, even during blackouts, powered by a rattling generator and unshakable humor. He swears he once gave a soldier a mohawk by accident and lived to tell the tale. In Iraq, Saddam Hussein continues his dramatic interpretation of how to lose friends and invade people. The Iran-Iraq War kills hundreds of thousands, exhausts both nations, and introduces the region to modern chemical warfare. You try not to breathe too deeply. The 1990s end with satellite dishes on every rooftop and growing unease in every corner. The 9/11 attacks in 2001 send new ripples through the region. The U.S. invades Afghanistan, then Iraq, toppling Saddam, but opening another Pandora's box of insurgency, sectarianism, and very questionable contractor food. Over in Iran, a quiet generation of reformers and poets keeps whispering for change. In the mosques, sermons thunder. In the cafes, students sketch freedom into notebooks with Wi-Fi passwords on the covers. Fringe fact: in the early 2000s, a Palestinian professor proposed peace through poetry workshops between school children in Ramallah and Tel Aviv. The project lasted 5 months, 2 anthologies, and 1 powerful argument over metaphors. Meanwhile, Saudi Arabia walks a tightrope balancing oil wealth, U.S. friendship, and religious conservatism. It funds madrasas abroad and mega projects at home. Inside its borders, women begin pushing for more than just the right to drive. The car keys are symbolic, sure, but also very practical. You ride a train in Tehran, where a young man shows you videos of underground rock bands. He shrugs when asked if he's worried. Only on Wednesdays, he jokes. In Jerusalem, families light candles for Shabbat, call prayers echo over minarets, and Christian monks shuffle past you with shopping bags full of lentils and laundry soap. Somehow it all fits and doesn't. Maps are no longer just printed. They're updated live, blinking with red zones and green ones, check marks and walls. The separation barrier winds through the West Bank like a concrete vine dividing roads, olive groves, and even picnic plans. And yet, there are still weddings. A Jewish groom stomps the glass. A Palestinian bride throws pomegranate petals. Somewhere nearby, someone is likely grumbling, but for a fleeting night, everyone just dances. Historians still argue whether the constant revisiting of conflict zones creates empathy or just fatigue, but you can't unsee what you've seen. You leave the Holy Land and drift east into Mesopotamia's bones, modern Iraq, still unstable now, wrangling with occupation, insurgency, and the slow grind of reconstruction. American Humvees, idle near Babylonian ruins. Someone jokes that the Tower of Babel might have just been a really bad zoning project. It's the era of satellite news, social media storms, and drone footage. Truth blurs, narratives clash, and every moment is replayed before it's even finished. Yet, on a dusty road outside Mosul, you meet a farmer who's replanting date palms, burned in the war. They take years to grow, he says. So what years pass anyway? Sometimes it's that simple. Still clashing, still sacred. Why peace is hard when every dune holds a different divine footnote. The present arrives not with trumpets, but with phones that buzz more than prophets ever dreamed. You stand beneath a desert sun that's watched empires rise and tweets go viral. The conflicts remain. Only the hashtags have changed. Mainstream historical fact: Since the 2010s, the region has weathered the Arab Spring, the Syrian Civil War, the rise and fall of ISIS, and a long string of international summits that promise everything and deliver approximately a falafel's worth. The old players, Israel, Palestine, Iran, Saudi Arabia, still orbit one another warily, like dancers who know the steps but not the music. You sip mint tea in a shaded Cairo cafe, where a man with more opinions than teeth lectures you on every failure of modern diplomacy. His daughter rolls her eyes. She's studying international relations, mostly so I can unrelate all of this, she mutters. In Iran, the nuclear issue simmers like a pot that never quite boils over. Agreements are made, then broken. Inspectors come and go. Historians still argue whether the real danger lies in uranium or in misunderstandings that pile up like dusty treaties on a diplomat's desk. Fringe tidbit. In 2017, a Saudi prince paid over $450 million for a painting believed to be by Leonardo da Vinci, then stored it on a yacht for years. Some say it's about soft power. Others say it's just weird. You drive through parts of Syria now barely held together by tarps and willpower. Aleppo's ancient citadel watches over streets once bustling with spice, now silent with rubble. Yet life returns. A bakery opens a boy, sells jasmine. A violin echoes through a cracked window. In Gaza, blockades squeeze like a vice. Power outages are routine, but so are weddings, rooftop chickens, and graffiti murals of doves sometimes painted over tanks. In Jerusalem, the old city still hums. Tourists bargain for olives. Worshippers press hands to ancient stones, and school kids sneak snacks behind history's back. New players appear. UAE, Qatar, Turkey, each wielding influence in different flavors. Gas pipelines, global sports teams, satellite channels. Everyone's a stakeholder now. The pie keeps getting smaller, but the forks keep multiplying. A young man in Ramallah codes an app to track checkpoints. His grandmother still writes complaints on napkins. Both are in their own way, trying to make sense of lines, real and imagined. Historians still argue whether peace is a destination, a process, or just a word used by people who get invited to conferences. But you've walked through every twist of this story. Arabia, Persia, the Holy Land. They share roots, wounds, and stubborn dreams. Geography brings them together. History keeps them apart. Faith ties them like string and scissors at once. In the end, it may not be about who wins or who's right. It may be about who still plants olive trees, who still teaches poetry, who still lights a candle at dusk, not for victory, but for memory. And as you tuck your notes away and fold one last map, this one digital glowing faintly, you look out over a land that never truly sleeps. And finally feel yourself drifting off, You've been walking this winding trail for hours now, through dust and incense, across borders, both drawn and imagined. Your feet are tired, your thoughts soft, like desert sand under a rising moon. All around you the world slows, the camels rest, the street vendors hum lullabies without realizing. Even the wind, which once carried the scent of conquest and cumin, seems to pause, choosing quiet over drama. You picture an old man in Damascus, mending a pair of shoes beside a cracked fountain. He doesn't speak much anymore. He's said all he needs to. Or maybe he just enjoys the sound of silence finally settling in. Somewhere in a Jerusalem courtyard, a cat slips between archways as the candles burn lower. In Tehran, a father recites Hafez by heart to a baby who hasn't yet learned how to worry. In Cairo, a boy counts stars instead of reasons. And here you are, surrounded by 1,000 years of triumphs, tragedies, treaties, and teacups. You've made it through the long and restless history of one of the world's most fiercely beloved, fiercely disputed regions. And still your breath is steady. The story isn't over, of course. It never is. But tonight, let it rest. Let the names and empires, the saints and sultans, fold gently into the fabric of dreams. No more arguments, no more maps. Just this soft, golden stillness like sand, finally choosing to settle. Good night, traveler. Sleep well.